Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's heartwarming tale about a lawyer who married his client to save her. But what started as a fake marriage soon turned into something much deeper. Let's see how this unexpected bond unfolds. Meet Jessica Thompson, a young woman in her late 20s, living a life full of challenges. She worked tirelessly as a receptionist in a small law office, always just scraping by. Bills piled up, and dreams of a better life seemed like distant stars, unreachable no matter how hard she tried. A smile was always on her face, but deep down, she felt the weight of every missed opportunity, every moment she couldn't afford to take a step forward. The world felt too big, and she was too small. But one fateful afternoon, everything changed when she walked into the office of Thomas Wells, one of the most successful and wealthy lawyers in the city. Thomas Wells was known for his sharp mind and impeccable legal record. He was a man of power, constantly in demand by the elite, and he never had time for distractions. His life was an endless parade of high-stakes cases, business meetings, and social events, all focused on maintaining his empire. Despite his wealth, Thomas led a solitary existence. His success hadn't brought him happiness, only more work and more distance from the world. But when Jessica walked into his office that day, asking for legal help with a financial mess, something inside him shifted. Her honesty, her struggles, they were real, and unlike anyone he had met in his high-flying world. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt a pull to do more than just represent her. "I can't help you, not the way you think," Thomas said, his voice calm but firm. He was sitting behind his sleek, modern desk, the room bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through the blinds. Jessica stood across from him, nervously clutching a file in her hands, unsure of what to do next. She took a deep breath, determined not to let her pride get in the way. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know who else to turn to. I'm losing everything. The bank's threatening to take my house, and I don't have the money to fight it." Her eyes were filled with desperation, but also with something else, hope. Thomas paused for a moment, his mind racing. He had seen many clients like Jessica, but something about her story tugged at him. He thought of all the people in his life who had always needed something from him, whether it was money, advice, or favors. He thought about how little they actually cared about him, and how much he had distanced himself from true human connection. This woman, though, was different. She was real. She was asking for help, not pity. Then, without thinking, Thomas said something that shocked them both. "I can help you, but there's a condition." Jessica looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. "What kind of condition?" she asked. "I need you to marry me," he said bluntly, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes locking with hers. "It's the only way I can protect your assets and help you with the legal troubles. A marriage of convenience, no emotions involved. It'll save you, and it'll help me too." Jessica was speechless, her mind racing to process what he had just proposed. "You're serious?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You want me to marry you? Just like that?" Thomas nodded, his face expressionless. "It's a legal arrangement, nothing more. But I promise you it'll work. You'll be financially protected, and I'll take care of the rest." The room was silent for a moment as Jessica absorbed his words. She had never imagined her life taking such a strange turn. A fake marriage to a millionaire lawyer, a man who could change everything for her, and yet, he was offering her something with no strings attached. No love, no emotions, just a legal contract. Could she really do this? Could she accept this unconventional offer, even if it meant sacrificing her personal beliefs for survival? As she looked at Thomas, his cold but confident demeanor suddenly felt more like a mask, hiding his own loneliness. She had to admit, the offer was tempting, and for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt like she had a chance to start over. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "I'll do it." And just like that, the deal was struck. What began as a simple legal arrangement was about to turn their lives upside down. Neither Thomas nor Jessica knew it yet, But this fake marriage would become something neither of them expected, something real. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's heartwarming tale about a lawyer who married his client to save her. But what started as a fake marriage soon turned into something much deeper. Let's see how this unexpected bond unfolds. Meet Jessica Thompson, a young woman in her late 20s, living a life full of challenges. She worked tirelessly as a receptionist in a small law office, always just scraping by. Bills piled up, and dreams of a better life seemed like distant stars, unreachable no matter how hard she tried. A smile was always on her face, but deep down, she felt the weight of every missed opportunity, every moment she couldn't afford to take a step forward. The world felt too big, and she was too small. But one fateful afternoon, everything changed when she walked into the office of Thomas Wells, one of the most successful and wealthy lawyers in the city. Thomas Wells was known for his sharp mind and impeccable legal record. He was a man of power, constantly in demand by the elite, and he never had time for distractions. His life was an endless parade of high-stakes cases, business meetings, and social events, all focused on maintaining his empire. Despite his wealth, Thomas led a solitary existence. His success hadn't brought him happiness, only more work and more distance from the world. But when Jessica walked into his office that day, asking for legal help with a financial mess, something inside him shifted. Her honesty, her struggles, they were real, and unlike anyone he had met in his high-flying world. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt a pull to do more than just represent her. "I can't help you, not the way you think," Thomas said, his voice calm but firm. He was sitting behind his sleek, modern desk, the room bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through the blinds. Jessica stood across from him, nervously clutching a file in her hands, unsure of what to do next. She took a deep breath, determined not to let her pride get in the way. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know who else to turn to. I'm losing everything. The bank's threatening to take my house, and I don't have the money to fight it." Her eyes were filled with desperation, but also with something else, hope. Thomas paused for a moment, his mind racing. He had seen many clients like Jessica, but something about her story tugged at him. He thought of all the people in his life who had always needed something from him, whether it was money, advice, or favors. He thought about how little they actually cared about him, and how much he had distanced himself from true human connection. This woman, though, was different. She was real. She was asking for help, not pity. Then, without thinking, Thomas said something that shocked them both. "I can help you, but there's a condition." Jessica looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. "What kind of condition?" she asked. "I need you to marry me," he said bluntly, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes locking with hers. "It's the only way I can protect your assets and help you with the legal troubles. A marriage of convenience, no emotions involved. It'll save you, and it'll help me too." Jessica was speechless, her mind racing to process what he had just proposed. "You're serious?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You want me to marry you? Just like that?" Thomas nodded, his face expressionless. "It's a legal arrangement, nothing more. But I promise you it'll work. You'll be financially protected, and I'll take care of the rest." The room was silent for a moment as Jessica absorbed his words. She had never imagined her life taking such a strange turn. A fake marriage to a millionaire lawyer, a man who could change everything for her, and yet, he was offering her something with no strings attached. No love, no emotions, just a legal contract. Could she really do this? Could she accept this unconventional offer, even if it meant sacrificing her personal beliefs for survival? As she looked at Thomas, his cold but confident demeanor suddenly felt more like a mask, hiding his own loneliness. She had to admit, the offer was tempting. And for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt like she had a chance to start over. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "I'll do it." And just like that, the deal was struck. What began as a simple legal arrangement was about to turn their lives upside down. Neither Thomas nor Jessica knew it yet, but this fake marriage would become something neither of them expected, something real. Days passed, and Jessica found herself waking up to a completely different life. Her apartment, which had always felt too small and too cluttered, now seemed to represent something much bigger: opportunity. Thomas Wells had been true to his word. The marriage was official, and the legal papers were signed. The financial protection she needed was now in place. But she never expected how quickly her life would shift. From the moment they exchanged vows in the sterile office of the courthouse, things had begun to change. The marriage wasn't filled with the excitement and joy one might expect from a wedding day, but Jessica couldn't deny the relief she felt. At least, now, the looming threat of losing everything had been lifted. But despite the legal contract that had tied them together, their lives remained worlds apart. Jessica's days still consisted of answering phones and sorting paperwork at the law office, while Thomas continued his whirlwind life of high-powered meetings, conferences, and charity events. His world was fast-paced, his time always scheduled down to the minute. He barely had time to breathe, let alone focus on someone like Jessica. She was still just the woman who had signed a contract, not someone who had a place in his life beyond that. But as days turned into weeks, Jessica began to realize that this was more than just a simple agreement. There were moments, small moments, that shifted things for her. One of those moments came just a few days after the wedding. Thomas asked her to accompany him to a gala. "It's important," he had said, his voice flat and businesslike, offering no explanation beyond that. At first, Jessica was hesitant. She wasn't used to these kinds of events. She had spent most of her life on the fringes, never imagining herself mingling with the city's elite. But something about the way Thomas spoke, almost like a challenge, made her agree. She would go, not for him, but to prove to herself that she could. She was married now, legally and on paper. She would learn how to be the wife of a man like him, even if it was just for appearances. That night, the gala hall was buzzing with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. The guests were dressed to the nines, their every movement calculated. Jessica felt like an outsider. She stood awkwardly in the corner, holding a glass of wine, watching Thomas glide through the crowd with ease. He greeted people with practiced smiles and firm handshakes, his reputation as a successful lawyer and philanthropist making him the center of attention. It was clear that everyone respected him, but Jessica felt out of place, as if she didn't belong here at all. But then, just as she was about to retreat further into the background, something unexpected happened. Thomas, who had been surrounded by colleagues and business partners, turned and saw her standing alone. He excused himself from the group and made his way over to her, his expression softening for just a moment. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice surprisingly kind. Jessica blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. She hadn't expected him to care. "It's fine," she replied, offering a small, awkward smile. "Just not really my scene, you know." She gestured toward the crowd. "All of this, it's so, I don't know, foreign to me." Thomas looked at her for a moment, as though considering her words. Then, with a surprising chuckle, he said, "I get it. I don't exactly love these events either. But sometimes, they're necessary." He paused, glancing around at the people still mingling. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you. I'm not exactly the best company at these things." For a moment, Jessica saw something in his eyes, something real. It wasn't the hardened businessman she had seen up until now. This was the man behind the suit, someone who, for a fleeting second, let down his guard. She smiled, more genuinely this time. "It's okay. I'm just happy to be here with you, even if I don't know what to say to half these people." Thomas nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "You don't have to say anything. Just be yourself." He reached for her hand, a rare gesture of comfort that made her heart race. "You're doing just fine." For the first time since they had signed the papers, Jessica felt something that resembled warmth between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real, something that felt like the beginning of a connection. Later that evening, after the gala was over, they sat in the back of the car heading home. The city lights flickered outside, casting a soft glow on their faces. It was quiet, save for the hum of the engine. Jessica glanced over at Thomas, who seemed lost in thought. She wanted to ask him why he had agreed to this arrangement in the first place. Why had he married her, a woman he barely knew, just to protect her assets. But instead, she stayed quiet, unsure of how to ask such a personal question. "You did well tonight," Thomas said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You held your own out there." Jessica turned to look at him, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks," she replied softly. "I was worried I'd make a fool of myself." Thomas smiled slightly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't worry. You're not the first person to feel that way." His gaze shifted out of the window again, and the moment passed. As they arrived back at his penthouse, Jessica's mind raced. The night had been full of surprises, and the distance between her and Thomas seemed to be narrowing, even if only slightly. Could this fake marriage, this arrangement born out of necessity, become something more? She wasn't sure. But for the first time, she felt like there was a chance. The next few weeks went by in a blur for Jessica. Her life, once filled with uncertainty and fear, now felt like it had shifted into something new, something unfamiliar. She still worked at the law office, but now, she was living in a luxury apartment in the heart of the city, a place that felt more like a showroom than a home. The stark contrast between her old life and her new one was overwhelming at times. The shiny surfaces, the endless designer furniture, and the silence of the penthouse felt surreal. But it was the absence of Thomas that made her feel most unsettled. Thomas was still the same, distant, businesslike, and focused on his work. He would come home late, always on calls or finishing up emails, leaving her to her own devices. The few times they crossed paths, it was polite, but there was a noticeable distance between them. She was still just a name on a contract to him. And while she was beginning to see glimpses of a man beneath the businessman, the truth was, Jessica wasn't sure where she stood with him. They had both agreed this marriage was for convenience. But as the days passed, something began to shift in Jessica's heart. One night, as she sat in the living room flipping through a book, a soft knock on the door startled her. It was already past midnight, and she wasn't expecting anyone. She stood up quickly, setting the book down on the coffee table, and walked to the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to find Thomas standing there, looking a bit disheveled, his tie loosened, and his face more exhausted than usual. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Can we talk?" Jessica stepped back, her heart racing slightly. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come in." Thomas walked in, looking around the apartment as though he was seeing it for the first time. He didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered on the stark, modern furniture before settling on her. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant, "about this whole arrangement." He paused, taking a deep breath. It's not what I expected. It's harder than I thought." Jessica's brow furrowed, and she crossed her arms. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice calm but her mind racing. Thomas hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I thought it would be just business. But it's not. There's more to this than I expected. More than I'm ready for." He looked up at her, his eyes searching hers. "I didn't anticipate how much you'd get under my skin." The air between them seemed to freeze. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't tell if he was opening up or just being vulnerable because of stress, but for the first time, there was a crack in his facade. She could see it. He wasn't just the cold, detached man who had married her out of convenience. There was something else there. Something she hadn't expected. She took a step toward him, her voice soft. "Thomas, you don't have to explain anything to me. We both know what this was." She gestured between them. "A marriage of convenience. That's all it is, right?" Thomas nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Yeah, but what if? What if that's not enough? What if I can't keep pretending it's all just business?" He paused again, the tension palpable. "I know this wasn't supposed to be about feelings, but I don't know if I can keep pretending it's just an arrangement anymore." Jessica's mind raced. She had no idea what to say. Part of her wanted to tell him she felt the same, that this fake marriage was no longer just a contract to her, either. But the other part of her, the part that had learned to protect her heart, knew better than to jump in without understanding what was really going on. She couldn't let herself fall for a man who had only married her out of necessity. Or could she? The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're in this, Thomas. We're in it together. But we need to figure out what that really means. I don't want to just be a name on a piece of paper. I don't want to keep living in a world where everything feels fake." She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say next. But I don't know how to move past that either. Thomas took a step closer to her, his gaze steady. Maybe it's time we figure that out. For the first time since their wedding, Jessica felt like they were no longer just going through the motions. There was something real starting to form between them, but it was fragile, and neither of them knew how to hold on to it. But tonight, the distance that had defined their marriage seemed to shrink, even if just for a moment. And in that moment, for the first time, Jessica allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this marriage could become more than just a contract. Maybe it could be real. The days following their conversation felt different, more intense in a way that Jessica couldn't quite put into words. Thomas had been more present. Not physically, necessarily, but emotionally. He wasn't as distant as he used to be, and it seemed like they were learning to navigate this marriage, this strange, contract-bound connection. Their interactions, while still formal, held moments of understanding and an almost fragile bond. There were glances exchanged that lingered a bit longer, words spoken with a weight that hadn't been there before. But despite the subtle changes, Jessica couldn't help but wonder, was this real, or was it just a fleeting shift in a relationship built on convenience? One evening, a week later, Thomas invited Jessica to join him for dinner at a new upscale restaurant he had been eager to try. It's not a date, he had said, his tone light, but with a trace of something she couldn't quite place. But we might as well enjoy the benefits of being married, right? Jessica chuckled, not sure whether to take him seriously or not. It was strange, being invited to spend time together in a more personal setting, like this wasn't just about appearances anymore. And so she agreed. The restaurant was everything Jessica had imagined it would be, sleek, modern, and full of the city's wealthiest. The lighting was low, the atmosphere intimate, and the menu was filled with dishes she couldn't even pronounce. Thomas seemed at ease in this world, confident and comfortable as he discussed his work with a business associate over the phone. Jessica, on the other hand, felt out of place, holding her glass of wine and barely touching her food. She watched him from across the table, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke about work, the brief flashes of weariness in his eyes that he quickly masked. It was easy to forget that beneath the successful lawyer, there was a man who carried a lot more than just business stress. "You look good tonight," Thomas said suddenly, breaking her out of her thoughts. His voice was casual, but there was a softness to it that she hadn't heard before. Jessica raised an eyebrow, unsure of how to respond. Was he just being polite, or was there something more in his words? "Thanks," she replied, her voice a little softer than usual. "You're not so bad yourself." She smiled, though the words felt strange coming from her. They both knew this wasn't a typical romantic dinner. They weren't here for love, they were here out of necessity. But as the night wore on, something began to shift. The awkwardness faded, and they actually started to talk. About everything and nothing. About their days, their lives before this arrangement, and even their hopes for the future, though neither one of them knew what to expect. By the time dessert arrived, Jessica found herself smiling more than she had in a long time. Thomas was still the same man who had been cold and distant just a few weeks ago, but there was a different energy now, something that felt almost comfortable. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if this might not just be about the contract, but something more. Could it be that, without either of them realizing it, their fake marriage was starting to turn into something genuine? Later, when they stepped out of the restaurant into the cool night air, Thomas turned to Jessica with a small smile. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said. "I know this isn't exactly the life you imagine, but I'm glad we're figuring this out." His voice was quiet, almost like he was admitting something to her that he hadn't said before. Jessica looked at him, her heart racing unexpectedly. There was sincerity in his words, and in his eyes, something that was slowly starting to break through the walls he had built around himself. "Yeah, me too," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know what this is turning into, but I'm not ready to walk away yet." For a moment, they just stood there, the city's lights flickering around them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Jessica's heart beat a little faster. She had never expected to feel this way, hopeful, even in such a complicated situation. But as Thomas took a step closer, the distance between them seemed smaller than it had been in weeks. "Maybe we should give it a real shot," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words caught Jessica off guard, and for a second, she didn't know how to respond. But then, She realized this was the turning point. They were no longer just two people bound by a contract. They were two people trying to figure out if they could make something real out of something that started as fake. "Maybe we should," she said finally, her voice a mix of nervousness and hope. And in that moment, Jessica allowed herself to believe that this strange, unexpected marriage could lead to something more than either of them had imagined. The days that followed their conversation felt different for Jessica. There was a new energy between her and Thomas, one that neither of them could ignore. They had crossed a line, gone from two people pretending to be married to two people who were slowly starting to realize they might actually care about each other. The tension between them was palpable, but it wasn't the cold, business-like tension it had been before. This was something else, something deeper. They were no longer just a lawyer and his client. They were two people figuring out how to make this unconventional marriage work, and for the first time in a long time, Jessica was willing to take the chance. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she couldn't just go back to how things were before. One afternoon, Thomas asked her to come with him to a charity event he was hosting. At first, Jessica hesitated. Charity events were never her thing, and the thought of being surrounded by people she didn't know made her nervous. But when Thomas insisted, his voice calm yet firm, she agreed. She could feel the shift in their dynamic. He wasn't just telling her what to do anymore. There was a level of understanding between them that hadn't existed before. And so, she said yes. The event was held at a large ballroom downtown, a beautiful space adorned with glittering chandeliers and soft lighting. The guests were dressed in elegant evening gowns and tuxedos, and the atmosphere was one of quiet sophistication. Jessica stood in the corner, feeling like an outsider as she adjusted her dress. She wasn't used to these kinds of events, wasn't used to being in rooms where people spoke in hushed tones about business deals and charity contributions. But she couldn't deny that something about the night felt different. Thomas was different. As she sipped her drink, she watched Thomas move through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with other guests. He looked at home here, surrounded by the kind of people who had always been in control, people who knew how to navigate this world. But as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. Thomas, for the first time, sought her out in the crowd. He made his way toward her, a rare smile on his face. "There you are," he said softly, his voice warm. "I was starting to wonder where you went." Jessica smiled back, her heart fluttering in her chest. "I'm not exactly a fan of these things," she admitted, glancing around the room. "It's all a bit overwhelming for me." Thomas chuckled, his eyes twinkling with something she couldn't quite place. "I know, but you're doing just fine." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I know this isn't easy, but I'm glad you're here." For the first time since they had met, Jessica felt like Thomas wasn't just fulfilling his obligations as her husband or as her business partner, but that he actually cared. He wasn't just putting on a show. He was here, with her, in this moment. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. The night went on, and as they left the event together, walking through the cool night air, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air between them was charged with something new, something unspoken but undeniable. They had spent weeks in this strange, contractual marriage, and yet, tonight, it felt as though they had crossed a threshold. As they stood on the steps of the venue, the city lights casting a soft glow around them, Thomas turned to Jessica. "I know this wasn't supposed to be anything more than what it is," he said, his voice low. "But I can't help but wonder. Could this become something real?" Jessica looked at him, her heart beating faster than she expected. She had spent so long building walls around herself, guarding her heart, afraid of what would happen if she let someone in. But standing here with Thomas, in the quiet of the night, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take that step. Maybe this wasn't just a contract. Maybe this could be something more. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the city bustling around them. Then, slowly, Jessica nodded, a soft smile crossing her face. "Maybe it could," she whispered. "But let's take it one step at a time." And as they walked down the steps together, hand in hand, Jessica felt like she was walking into a new chapter of her life, one that was no longer defined by the contract they had signed, but by the possibility of something more. As the weeks passed, Jessica and Thomas began to settle into a new rhythm. Their marriage, which had started as a mere contract, was now something more, though neither of them dared to call it love, not yet. Still, there were moments that felt real. They shared quiet dinners at home, talked about their days, and laughed at each other's jokes. They were beginning to understand one another, in a way that felt both natural and surprising. But despite the changes, there was still a lingering question that hung between them. Was this just a temporary shift, or was it the beginning of something lasting? Jessica wasn't sure, but she knew that for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. One afternoon, Thomas asked Jessica to meet him at his office after work. He didn't give her much detail, only that he had something important to discuss. Jessica's heart skipped a beat as she wondered what this could be about. She had gotten used to the ebb and flow of their newly discovered connection, but the thought of Thomas wanting to talk seriously about their relationship made her nervous. Was this a good thing or a bad thing? She walked into the sleek, modern office building, her nerves tingling. As she entered Thomas's office, she found him sitting behind his desk, papers scattered around him, his usual intense focus written across his face. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Thomas looked up, meeting her gaze. He stood up and walked over to her, the seriousness in his eyes evident. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "About this arrangement we've created." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I know it. Started as a business deal, but it's not just that anymore. I've been thinking about what this could mean for us, long term." Jessica's heart raced as she listened. She wasn't sure what he was getting at, but she could sense that whatever he was about to say would change things between them. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes were wide with anticipation, and for a moment, she felt like the air in the room was thick with possibility. Thomas's gaze softened. "I mean that I want this to be real, Jessica. I want us to stop pretending. I want you to be more than just my wife on paper. I want you to be my partner. I know we've been walking around in circles, not knowing what this is, but I don't want to keep avoiding the truth anymore." The words hit Jessica like a wave. She had never expected this. Sure, they had been spending more time together, learning about one another, but she had always held back. She didn't know how to fully trust this situation, especially given how it had started. But looking at Thomas now, his sincerity, his vulnerability, she realized that he wasn't just saying these words because it was expected. He was saying them because he meant them. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly with the weight of her emotions. "Are you really sure that this is what you want?" Thomas stepped closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes," he said firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to be with you, Jessica. I want to build something real with you. And I want you to know that I'm here, all in. No more pretending." Jessica's heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had spent so long convincing herself that this marriage wasn't real, that it was just a way out of her financial problems. But now, Thomas was telling her something different. He was telling her that he wanted her, that he saw her as more than just a legal arrangement. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and placed her hand on his chest. "I don't know what this means for us yet," she said softly, "but I'm willing to take that chance. I want to see where this can go. Together." Thomas smiled, his expression full of relief and warmth. "That's all I needed to hear," he said. "We'll figure it out, step by step." As they stood there, close together, the uncertainty of the past seemed to melt away. Jessica realized that this wasn't just a marriage of convenience anymore. It was a marriage built on trust, on honesty, and on the possibility of something real. They had both come a long way from where they had started, and for the first time, Jessica felt truly hopeful about their future together. They walked out of the office together, hand in hand, no longer just two people bound by a contract. They were partners now, in every sense of the word. And while there were still many steps to take, Jessica knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks that followed their conversation felt like a whirlwind for Jessica and Thomas. They were still navigating the complexities of their relationship, but there was an undeniable shift in the air. What had started as an arrangement based on convenience was slowly blossoming into something more genuine. Thomas was more present, more engaged, and Jessica found herself falling into a rhythm she hadn't expected. Their time together was no longer about keeping up appearances, but about understanding each other, discovering shared moments, and building something that was theirs. One evening, as they sat together in the living room after dinner, Thomas turned to Jessica with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about everything we've been through, about how far we've come." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "I think it's time we take the next step. We can't keep going like this, with one foot in the door and the other out. If we're going to do this, we need to commit. Fully." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. The weight of his words settled heavily in the room. She had known, deep down, that this moment would come, that eventually, they would have to decide if they were truly in this together. But hearing him say it aloud made everything feel more real. She looked at Thomas, seeing not just the man who had once been a stranger, but the one who had been by her side through this unexpected journey. "What do you mean by commit?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, unsure of what exactly he was asking. Thomas took a deep breath before responding. "I mean, we stop pretending this is just a business arrangement. We start building a future together. I want to be with you, Jessica, not just as your husband on paper, but as someone who is really a part of your life. I want to share everything with you, even the parts I've kept hidden for so long." His eyes softened as he continued. "I know it hasn't been easy, but I believe we can make this work. If you're willing to trust me." The air between them was thick with tension. Jessica could feel the sincerity in his words, but she also knew the risk. They were still new to each other, still learning the depths of what it meant to be partners in more than just a contract. But as she looked at him, she realized that she had already begun to trust him in ways she hadn't expected. She had allowed herself to open up to him, and in doing so, she had found something more than she ever thought possible. "I've trusted you this far," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm willing to take that step with you. I want to see what happens when we truly commit to this together." Thomas's expression softened, a look of relief and happiness crossing his face. "That's all I needed to hear," he said, taking her hand in his. "From this moment forward, we're in this. No more doubts, no more pretending." For the first time since they had met, Jessica felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't love in the traditional sense yet, but it was real. And as Thomas pulled her into a gentle embrace, she realized that this was the beginning of something new. Together, they had taken the first real step into building a life that was theirs, and though the future was uncertain, she had never felt more ready to face it with him by her side. As they stood there, holding each other in the quiet of the night, Jessica allowed herself to believe that the love they had been building was no longer just an idea. It was something tangible, something that could grow with time. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. The following months were a whirlwind for Jessica and Thomas. What had begun as a simple, practical arrangement had evolved into something neither of them had expected. The walls between them slowly came down, brick by brick. They spent more time together, and every moment felt like a step closer to something real. They shared more than just dinners and conversations. They began to share parts of themselves they had kept hidden for years. For Jessica, it was the first time in a long time that she felt truly seen, not just as a woman who needed help, but as someone worthy of love and partnership. And for Thomas, it was the first time he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to admit that his life was about more than just success and appearances. One evening, after a long week of work and late nights, Thomas surprised Jessica with a quiet dinner at their apartment. He had been planning it for weeks, a gesture to show her how far they had come. The table was set simply, yet elegantly, with candles flickering softly in the dim light. As they sat down to eat, the atmosphere felt different from the usual tension of their previous interactions. It was comfortable. It was warm. And for the first time in their marriage, it felt like they were truly partners. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, his voice soft as he reached across the table to take her hand. "I know this isn't what either of us planned, but I want you to know that I'm here. For real. Not just as your husband on paper, but as someone who wants to be with you in every way." Jessica looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. His words weren't just comforting. They were everything she had been hoping for, without even realizing it. She had spent so much time wondering whether this marriage could truly become something meaningful, and now, as she looked at Thomas, she realized it had already begun. They had already crossed that line. They were no longer just a couple bound by a contract. They were a couple, period. "I want that too," Jessica replied softly, squeezing his hand. "I know it's been complicated, but I'm willing to take the leap." With you. No more doubts. No more wondering if this is just a phase. She paused, her voice trembling slightly. I want us to make it real. Thomas smiled, the warmth in his eyes matching the tenderness in his voice. We already have. We've made it real, Jessica. This is real, and I'm not going anywhere. As they finished their meal, the conversation turned to their future. The uncertainty of the past few months seemed to fade into the background as they spoke about their plans, things they wanted to do together, places they wanted to visit, a future they could build. For the first time, Jessica wasn't just imagining what could be. She was planning, with Thomas by her side, a future that was no longer uncertain, no longer based on a contract, but based on trust, partnership, and love. Later that night, as they relaxed on the couch, Jessica's mind wandered to the journey they had taken together. From a marriage built on necessity to a relationship founded on mutual respect and care, they had come so far. And as Thomas pulled her close, resting his head on hers, she realized that this was no longer just about the contract they had signed. This was about them. Two people who had taken a chance on each other, and who were now building something real. Thank you, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. For everything. Thomas looked at her, his eyes softening. Thank you too, for trusting me. And as they sat there, in the quiet of the night, Jessica knew that no matter what the future held, they had already made something real. They had made their marriage work, not because of a contract, but because of the love and commitment they had chosen to build together. As the months passed, Jessica and Thomas continued to build a life together that was beyond what either of them had ever expected. Their marriage, once a mere arrangement based on necessity, had transformed into something real, something beautiful. They had learned to love each other not because they had to, but because they chose to. They had both grown in ways they hadn't anticipated, and their bond had deepened, becoming the foundation of a future they were now excited to share. What had started as a way out of financial turmoil had turned into a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and for the first time in a long while, love. One sunny afternoon, as they sat together in the park, enjoying the simple peace of the moment, Thomas turned to Jessica with a soft smile on his face. I've been thinking about something, he said, his voice calm and thoughtful. We've come so far, haven't we? Jessica looked at him, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips. We really have, she replied. I never imagined we would end up here, but I'm so glad we did. Thomas took a deep breath, his eyes softening. I know it's been a journey, but I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. I know we didn't start off with the best foundation, but I believe we've built something real here, and I want to keep building it with you. Forever. Jessica's heart raced as she looked at him, feeling the depth of his words. She had known, deep down, that their relationship had changed. But hearing him speak these words out loud made her realize how far they had come, not just in their marriage, but in their lives. They had found something beautiful in the middle of all the uncertainty, something that had brought them closer together, despite the odds. Thomas, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, I feel the same way. I can't imagine my life without you either. I didn't know what I was getting into when we started this, but now, I know I wouldn't want it any other way. Thomas smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. Then let's make it official, Jessica. Let's do this the right way. And with that, Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. As he opened it, Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring, glistening in the sunlight. Will you marry me again? Thomas asked, his voice gentle but full of sincerity. This time for real. No contracts. Just us. The world seemed to stop for a moment as Jessica stared at the ring, the weight of the moment sinking in. It wasn't just a symbol of their love. It was a testament to everything they had built together, to the trust they had earned, the partnership they had forged, and the future they were ready to face, side by side. With tears in her eyes, Jessica nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, Thomas. Yes, I'll marry you again. For real. No contracts. Just us. And in that moment, as Thomas slid the ring onto her finger, Jessica knew that their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Together, they had turned an unexpected arrangement into a love story that neither of them could have predicted. And as they stood there, in the sunlight, ready to step into their future, Jessica realized that sometimes, life's most beautiful moments come from the most unlikely beginnings.